The rain in Bangkok was a different beast from the mountain mists of Chai's childhood. Here, it was a hot, greasy sheet that hammered the corrugated iron roofs of Klong Toei Market, turning the narrow alleys into slick, foul-smelling streams. Chai navigated them with an instinct born from a different kind of jungle. For 10 years, the urban sprawl had been his wilderness. A labyrinth of concrete and desperation he understood far better than the whispering bamboo groves of his past. The skills he'd honed in the Border Patrol tracking, observation, a sixth sense for ambush were just as useful here, spotting a pickpocket in a crowd or a liar in a business deal. He sat at a plastic table, the steam from his bowl of cow soy mingling with the exhaust fumes of a passing tuk-tuk. He was a man disconnected, a ghost in his own life, a carefully constructed fortress of cynicism and pragmatism. Saeng Dao, the village of starlight, was a festering wound he never touched. The memory of his mother, her face streaked with tears and dirt as the villagers cast her out, was a phantom limb that ached with the changing of seasons. They had called her a Grisly, a witch whose head detached at night to feast on filth and flesh. He was 10 years old, and all he could do was watch, paralyzed by a fear that later curdled into a lifelong burning hatred for the superstitions that had devoured his family. He'd left his sister, Pim, with their aunt in Chiang Mai City, vowing to earn enough to give her a life free from the suffocating grip of the past. But Pim, with her fierce, stubborn idealism, had chosen to go back. A newly qualified nurse, she believed she could make a difference, that modern medicine could sever the deep roots of fear and folklore that choked their people. He had begged her not to go. "They don't want your logic, Pim," he'd argued over a crackling phone line. "They want their spirits and their shamans. It's a poison that seeped into the soil." She had only laughed, her belief in progress as unshakable as his cynicism. "It's our home, Chai. Someone has to bring the light." The package arrived on a sweltering afternoon. It was a small, crudely wrapped box, reeking of camphor and something else. Something acrid and deeply unsettling, the smell of dried blood and old secrets. Inside, the sight hit him like a physical blow. Pim's silver locket, the one he'd saved for months to buy her, lay tarnished against a piece of yellowed cloth. Beside it, shriveled and brown like a dead locust, was a Luke croc. The grotesque talisman, a dried human fetus used in the darkest of Thai occultism, was a message of profound malevolence. His stomach heaved, the noodles turning to ash in his mouth. Beneath it all was a brittle strip of palm leaf. He almost missed the faint, spidery script etched into its surface. It was ancient Lana, a language of curses and blessings he hadn't seen since his grandmother's funeral. His hands trembled as he deciphered the words, the forgotten characters stirring a primal dread within him. The land must be fed. The queen must eat. The world of plastic tables and noodle soup dissolved. The jungle, the one he had tried to bury for a decade, reached out with thorny vines and dragged him back into its suffocating green embrace. The journey back to Saeng Dao was a descent into a past he'd fought to escape. The air grew cooler, cleaner, as the bus climbed the winding mountain roads, but Chai felt a knot of dread tighten in his chest with every kilometer. When the road ended, the final leg of the journey was on foot, up a path that was more memory than trail. The familiar scent of damp earth, wild orchids, and decaying leaves was a sensory assault, unlocking chambers of his mind he had sealed long ago. He remembered running down this path as a boy, a bamboo sword in hand. He remembered walking it in a daze, following the villagers who banished his mother. The village, when he finally crested the last ridge, was deceptively beautiful. Stilt houses clung to the mountainside, their thatched roofs like sleeping beasts, surrounded by a patchwork of impossibly green rice terraces carved from the earth like a giant's staircase. But as he walked into the village proper, the ideal shattered. An old woman sorting chili peppers on her porch stopped, her hands still, her eyes fixing on him. Two children playing with a spinning top fell silent. Conversations died in his wake. Faces turned, eyes following him with a silent, unnerving scrutiny. They were not hostile. Not yet. They were watching, measuring. This was not the prodigal son returning. This was a foreign body, an infection to be assessed. He found Aaron, the village headman, mending a fishing net on the porch of his home, the largest in the village. Aaron's face, a mask of calm authority, betrayed nothing as Chai approached. "Chai, the jungle has given you back to us," Aaron said, his voice a low, even baritone. It wasn't a welcome, it was a statement of fact. "Where is my sister, Aaron?" Chai's voice was rough, dispensing with pleasantries. He placed the locket and the wrapped luckrock on the mat between them. Aaron's composure finally cracked. He flinched from the fetal talisman as if it were a coiled viper, a genuine flicker of revulsion in his eyes. He picked up the palm leaf, his fingers tracing the Lana script. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. "The spirits are hungry this season," he finally murmured, not looking at Chai. "The harvest is poor. The mountain grows angry." "I didn't come for a lesson in folklore," Chai snapped. "I came for Pim. This is Molly's work, isn't it?" Aaron looked up, his eyes filled with a carefully crafted sorrow. "Grandmother Molly. She holds the old ways in her heart. She believes the village's soul is sick. Your sister, she came with needles and pills. She spoke against the offerings. Molly sees this as a challenge to the spirits, a foreign poison that must be purged." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She performs the Krasue ritual. It is a terrible ancient thing. To appease the spirit, to ensure the harvest, an offering must be made. An outsider's essence must be collected." Essence? The word was clinical, obscene. They believe the Krasue, the flying head of a witch, must feed on the entrails of the living to sustain itself, and in turn sustain the land, Aaron explained, his face a mask of weary resignation. "It is, of course, a story, a myth to scare children. But the ritual is real. Molly enters a trance. She wears a ceremonial mask. She leads her most devout followers into the night. They are the monster, Chai. They perform a symbolic hunt and take what the Krasue demands." Chai's blood ran cold. This was not a mindless mob. It was an organized, ritualized act of violence, cloaked in the sanctity of tradition. "You're the headman. Why haven't you stopped this?" Aaron sighed, a sound of profound helplessness. "Her word is law. They see her as a saint. To defy her is to defy the mountain itself. I am just one man." He looked Chai directly in the eye, a flicker of something that looked like hope in his gaze. "But you are not one of them. You are a soldier. You have seen the world outside. You are not bound by their fear." He drew a rough map in the dirt. "There is a sacred grove, deep in the jungle, near the ancient banyan. That is her temple. The ritual will be on the moonless night, 2 days from now. That is when the Krasue is most powerful." He looked around nervously. "I have told you this because Pim was a good girl. She did not deserve this. But you must be careful. You are fighting not a woman, but a god in their eyes." Chai left Aaron's house with a sliver of hope. He had an ally, a man trapped by circumstance. He was not entirely alone. For the next 48 hours, Chai became a predator. He melted into the jungle that bordered the village, a ghost in the green. He spent the first day observing, relearning the language of the forest. He watched the patterns of the villagers, noting the ones who spent their evenings at Molly's house, their faces alight with a feverish devotion. He saw a young man named Decha, whom he remembered as a shy boy, now walking with a swagger, his eyes holding a zealot's gleam. He was one of them. That night, Chai followed Decha from a distance. The young man took a circuitous route to an old, dilapidated rice mill at the edge of the village. Chai waited, hidden in a thicket of bamboo, his skin crawling with insects. Hours passed. Finally, Decha left. The mill was dark and silent. This was his chance. He moved with the practiced stealth of a night patrol, a shadow against shadows. The lock on the mill door was old and rusted. It yielded to a thin piece of metal from his survival kit. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust, rat droppings, and something else, the same cloying metallic scent from the package. In the far corner, covered by a dusty canvas, he found it. The ritual altar. It was a crude wooden table stained with something dark. On it lay a collection of wicked-looking knives, sharpened to a razor's edge, and basins made of polished coconut shells. And hanging on the wall behind it, a row of masks. They were horrifying, carved from teak and lacquered in green and crimson, with leering fanged mouths and hollow, soulless eyes. Each one was slightly different, a unique expression of manufactured terror. Beneath them, he found bundles of human hair tied with twine, and a small wooden box filled with personal trinkets, a child's toy, a silver earring, an old photograph. Trophies from past offerings. The sight confirmed Duran's story in the most visceral way imaginable. This was not a new development. It was an established, ongoing horror. The next day, he took the ultimate risk. He approached Molly's house directly. She was sitting on her porch, weaving a bamboo basket, a picture of serene old age. Her eyes, however, were not serene. They were as sharp and black as obsidian chips, and they missed nothing. "The soldier has returned," she said without looking up, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "The jungle always calls its own back." "I've come for my sister," Chai said, keeping his voice steady, his hand resting near the hilt of his machete. Molly looked up then, and a slow, chilling smile spread across her wrinkled face, a spider web of cracks. "Your sister gave herself to the land, a noble gift. The soil was so very thirsty this year." "She is not a sacrifice for your harvest," Chai growled, his discipline fraying. "We are all just food for the earth in the end, boy," she cackled, a dry, rattling sound. "Some of us just feed it sooner than others. The queen must eat, after all. It is the way. It has always been the way." She returned to her weaving, dismissing him as though he were a bothersome insect. He walked away with ice in his veins. There was no reasoning with her. She was a true believer, and in her faith, she was utterly invincible. He knew then that Aaron was right. He couldn't fight her directly. He had to fight the idea of her. His last stop was the hut of an old woman, Pa Da, who had been his mother's friend. He found her stirring a pot over a small fire, her face a roadmap of sorrow. She looked at him with pity. "You should not have come back, little Chai," she whispered, her voice frail. "This place is sick. Pa Da, you have to tell me what you know. Where do they hold the ritual?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. "To speak of it is to invite the Krasue to your own door. They hear everything. Molly, she is not just a woman. She is the mountain. She is the roots in the earth. She's a murderer," Chai hissed. "And you all let it happen." Tears welled in the old woman's eyes. "What can we do?" The headman, Aaron, he is her son. He protects her, the most loyal of all. He enforces her will. There is no one to turn to. The world tilted on its axis. Aaron, her son, the helpful headman, the voice of reason, the trapped ally, was the chief enforcer. The entire conversation, the map, the whispered warnings, it had all been an elaborate deception. A test. He hadn't been given a key. He'd been led into a cage. The moonless night swallowed the mountains whole. A thick, damp fog coiled through the trees, muffling all sound, making the world a claustrophobic stage. Chai moved through the oppressive darkness with practiced silence, his senses on a razor's edge. He was painted in mud and charcoal, a specter of vengeance armed with a sharpened machete, his service knife, and a stolen bottle of kerosene. The betrayal burned hotter than any anger. He was utterly, completely alone. He heard the chanting long before he saw the grove, a low, hypnotic drone that seemed to emanate from the very earth. It vibrated in his bones, a primal rhythm designed to unmoor the rational mind and open it to suggestion. He crept to the edge of the clearing and peered through a curtain of thick liana vines. The scene was a vision from a fever dream. Torchlight threw flickering, monstrous shadows against the trees. In the center, beneath the colossal, brooding canopy of the ancient banyan tree, Pim was tied to the gnarled roots. Her face was pale with terror, a dirty gag silencing her cries. Grandmother Molly was transformed. She wore a heavy, dark robe, and on her face was one of the grotesque Krasue masks, its painted snarl a thing of pure nightmare. She moved in a slow, hypnotic dance, her feet shuffling in the dirt, the ritual knife held aloft. Surrounding her in a loose circle were a dozen villagers, including Decha, their faces slack-jawed, their eyes vacant and staring. They were utterly in her thrall, puppets on the strings of her chant. And among them, standing slightly apart, was Aaron. His face was not empty like the others. It was calm, watchful, the shepherd guarding his flock. He saw the way Aaron's eyes scanned the perimeter of the grove, a commander surveying his battlefield. The truth Pa Da had given him settled into a cold, hard certainty. Aaron wasn't just a participant, he was the guardian of the lie. Molly's chanting reached a crescendo. She raised the knife, its edge gleaming, and began to advance on Pim. There was no more time for stealth. Chai knew he couldn't fight them all head-on. He had to break the god. He uncapped the kerosene. Ignoring the guards, he lunged from the darkness, sprinting not for Molly, but for the sacred tree itself. He sloshed the kerosene onto the thick, dry roots and the hundreds of prayer cloths tied around its base, offerings from generations of believers. Before the entranced villagers could react to the sudden intrusion, he struck a match. The banyan tree erupted in a furious whoosh of fire. Flames roared up the ancient trunk, devouring the sacred cloths and licking at the canopy. The heat was a physical blow. The chanting stopped, the spell shattered. The villagers cried out, a collective shriek of shock and terror. Their god, the physical embodiment of the mountain spirit, was burning. The trance broke like cheap pottery, their vacant expressions replaced with utter confusion and horror. They stared at the inferno, then at the scene it illuminated, Pim bound and terrified, Molly frozen mid-step, a bloodthirsty crone in a ridiculous mask holding a knife. The divine ritual was exposed for what it was. A brutal, premeditated murder. Blasphemer! Molly shrieked, her voice cracking with fury, pointing a trembling finger at Chai. But Chai was already moving, cutting Pim free. As he pulled her to her feet, Aaron charged, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. The facade of the calm headman was gone, replaced by the fanatical guardian. "You have destroyed everything!" he roared, swinging a heavy wooden club. Chai shoved Pim behind him and met the attack. The skills of the border patrol took over. He sidestepped the clumsy swing, using Aaron's momentum to throw him off balance. He didn't want to kill them, only to escape. He disarmed Aaron with a swift, brutal strike to the wrist, sending the club flying. "Decha, stop him!" Aaron screamed. Decha and 3 other villagers, their eyes wild with a mixture of fear and rage, lunged at him. Chai moved like water. a whirlwind of controlled violence in the flickering firelight. He used joint locks and pressure points, disabling his attackers without lethal force. He broke one man's nose with the heel of his palm. He sent Desha to the ground with a precise kick to the knee. He dislocated another's shoulder with a quick twist. They went down, gasping and clutching their injuries, their fanaticism no match for professional combat training. The clearing was in chaos. Villagers were screaming, some running from the fire, others staring in disbelief at their fallen protectors. Molly stood frozen, watching her power burn to the ground. In that moment, she was just a small old woman, her monster persona incinerated along with her sacred tree. "Now!" Chai yelled, grabbing Pim's hand. He dragged her away from the burning heart of the grove and into the dark jungle. Behind them, Aran screamed his name, a curse lost in the crackle of the flames and the rising panic of a faithless mob. A few tried to give chase, but the fire, the smoke, and the darkness disoriented them. Chai and Pim were back in their element. They were jungle creatures, and they vanished into the night. They ran, fueled by adrenaline and terror, crashing through the undergrowth, the sounds of the chaotic grove fading behind them. They didn't stop until the sun threatened the horizon, casting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. They collapsed on a ridge overlooking the valley, their lungs burning, their bodies scraped and bruised. Below, a thick pillar of black smoke coiled into the morning sky. The fire had spread. From the banyan, a cleansing, destructive force. The village of Starlight, from this distance, looked like a festering wound on the green skin of the mountain. Pim was sobbing, deep, shuddering breaths of someone who had stared into the abyss and survived. Chai held her, his own emotions a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound, aching sorrow. He hadn't fought a Krasue. He hadn't banished a supernatural entity. He had fought his own people, people so steeped in fear and tradition that they would butcher a young woman to make their crops grow. He had looked into the face of true evil, and it was the face of his neighbor, his childhood friend, the village elder. The most terrifying monsters were not the ones that flew in the night, but the ones that walked in the day, convinced of their own righteousness. The memory of his mother's exile now had a horrifying new context. She hadn't been cast out by superstitious fools, but by calculated murderers who needed a scapegoat. "What will they do now?" Pim whispered, her voice hoarse. "They will face the truth," Chai said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Or they will find a new lie to believe in, a new monster to fear." As the sun finally broke over the mountains, Chai helped Pim to her feet. They turned their backs on the smoking valley and began the long walk down the mountain, towards a world of concrete and logic, a world that suddenly seemed far less complicated. He had fled the jungle once to escape its ghosts, but he had returned to find the real monsters were human all along. And their screams, he knew, the screams of his sister and the phantom screams of his mother, would haunt him far longer than any spirit's wail. The scorched earth they left behind was not just in the village, but in his own soul.